Hello and welcome again to Conscious TV. I'm Iain McNay and my guest today is Michael James. And Michael has written a book which is quite a weighty tome. It's well over 500 pages and a lot of it's translated from Tamil, which is extraordinary for me because he's obviously an English guy. And the book is called Happiness and the Art of Being, Bhagavan Sri Ramana. It's about an introduction to the philosophy and practice of the spiritual teachings. And he's also known as Ramana Maharashi, who many of you will know by that name. And Michael has spent a lot of time, is it over 20 years in India, basically, at the ashram there. Yes. Got to know the teachings very well. Yes. And ended up writing this extraordinary book, really, which I must admit I haven't read every page, but I've dipped in and out, and it certainly is unique. So we're going to start really, Michael, with your story in inverted commas, just to find out more about your background, how you got to India, and then we'll go more into the teaching side. Right. So you said to me on the phone when we had a conversation that you always had a really questioning mind, and when you were a child, you wondered, does anything exist outside my bedroom?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I had quixotic, perhaps, ways of thinking even when I was young, and I questioned things, but I was questioning in a very... my questioning wasn't... obviously at a very young... I mean, I think when I remember thinking that in my mind, I was probably about 6 or something, 5 or 6. I don't remember. Yeah. So really young. So both sort of ideas were there, but my really deeper questioning, I think, began when I was a teenager. I was brought up as a Roman Catholic, and at first I believed everything, and I believed in God, and I believed all the things that I had been told. I was very accepting of the things that I had been taught.
But you were in a boarding school, weren't you?
Yeah, I went to a boarding school. I went to a boarding school. The public school I went to was run by Benedictine monks. But by the time I was 14, 15, 16, I was really beginning to question things more. And it wasn't that I didn't want to believe these things, but I wanted to know why I should believe these things. I wanted to have a reason to believe it. And I was told, well, it's a matter of faith. You have to, faith is a leap in the dark. But then I thought to myself, well, then you can believe anything. If it's a leap in the dark, why to believe Roman Catholicism rather than something else? I mean, it didn't seem reasonable to me. But and when I questioned more, and I was questioning very sincerely, but I remember one of the monks there telling me, but I wouldn't understand these things because I wasn't religious. I said, what do you mean I'm not religious? He said, well, you question too much. So that, to me, well, I think now my view is that it's... but actually seeking truth is beyond religion. I think religion has a role to play, but I think the spiritual path is really going beyond religion, because religions are very much about belief. Whereas in my view, spirituality is an investigation. Bhagavan calls the spiritual path he taught Atma-vichara, which means self-investigation. So it's an investigation. Investigation requires us to question everything.
But where did this come from, do you think? Because here you are, you're a teenager. Were your parents particularly encouraging you to challenge status quo?
Not at all, not at all. No. Very much the opposite. I mean, they were both brought up as Anglicans. When my father was in a prisoner of war camp, he converted as a Catholic, partly because of his family background. His parents had divorced when he was a teenager, and I think that had a big emotional impact on him. So he was looking for something solid. I think for him the Catholic Church represented tradition,
Yeah.
represented. So I mean, he did make a change in his life, but he was veering towards something that was out there, an institution, something that had a long history behind it and everything. So he was looking more for something, an outside thing. But critical thinking was not anything I was taught either by my parents or or at school. I mean,
it's just interesting. At an early age, you had this desire to question things.
Yes.
And even though you probably weren't that clear what you were looking for, you saw things weren't quite right and it didn't add up on the outside. And something was drawing you more on the inside. But of course the search also had to happen to some extent on the outside.
Yes, certainly. And early on I didn't really know what I was looking. I knew I was looking for something, but I didn't know what I was looking for. I mean, in those days probably I was thinking in terms of looking for a meaning to life or a purpose to life or something. But why I was like that, I mean, I think if you want an explanation, the easiest explanation is this is a resumption of whatever I was doing in previous lives. I think we all come with. I was in a family of 6 children. No two of us are the same. We all have got completely different interests and we follow completely different paths in life, but we all were brought up in essentially the same environment. So and this happens in every family. I mean, it's hard to explain the differences between people without thinking that we come to this world with something, some baggage from some previous state that we were in.
Anyway, at the age of 19, you started to have an adventure on the outside, and you went overland to India.
Yes.
And the thing that intrigued me was you didn't just, well, in those days there wasn't cheap flights, was there? So overland was the way to go, and you travelled in what you called a hippie bus, Athens, Istanbul, Tehran, and you spent 2 weeks in Iran and then 3 weeks in Afghanistan, travelling around on your own.
Yeah, the hippie bus was only as far as Athens.
Okay.
And from then on I was just using local transport.
Yeah.
And, generally I would try to go off the beaten track because I found that was more interesting.
And you did things that were wonderful because you couldn't do them now. You couldn't do that in Iran and Afghanistan now. Yeah. And did you?
Well, I left a trail of chaos wherever I went. I was in Iran before the revolution. I was in Afghanistan before the Russians invaded. I was in Kashmir before the troubles in Kashmir started. I was in Sri Lanka before the troubles in Sri Lanka started. So I seem to have left a trail of chaos wherever I went.
But there's a certain courage in what you did to go travelling on your own. You don't speak the language. You could just disappear.
As you say, it was very much easier in those days because things were. The world was. At least that part of the world was much more peaceful than it has been since then.
Yes, but I'm interested in this thing that was driving you in terms of not only did you want to find the truth inside, but you also were hungry for adventure on the outside as well.
Yes. Well, but it's all, in a way, it's part of the same thing because having spent 10 years in boarding schools, I had very little exposure to life, so I was hungry to experience life, but it wasn't just to experience the outside world, because in experiencing the outside world we learn about ourselves. But that is at a very superficial level, we're learning about ourselves. But I wanted to find my own way in life, let's say. But what drew me to go to India, I really knew very little about India, but except I had a vague idea. Many of the world's religions originated from India, and it's a country where there have been many great spiritual people. That's all a very vague idea. I knew nothing really about Hinduism, Buddhism, anything but when I set off, except that there was something I was looking for. I mean, I think the limit of my knowledge of Buddhism was a little bit that I'd read of Hermann Hesse, Siddhartha and such books. So I had a vague idea about the idea of Maya and such things, but it was all very, very, I mean, I really hadn't had exposure to these things, but I was looking for exposure to these things because my own cultural background didn't seem to offer me the answers that I was looking for. So I was hoping I would find something in some other culture, but these were not well-formed ideas, but these were vague ideas which were driving me, I suppose.
And when you got to India, what happened?
Well, I spent about a year travelling. No, I was travelling around India for nearly 18 months. And during the course of my travels, I went to many pilgrimage places, many of the temples in the Himalayas. I like to walk in the mountains. I spent quite a lot of time going to many of the well-known pilgrimage places in the Himalayas, which meant I was walking with sadhus, and I just open to whatever was available, basically. And
so when you say walking with sadhus, what does that mean for people?
Well, because a lot of people in those days, they still yatra, pilgrimage, still meant walking.
Right.
And particularly for sadhus, people who were living a mendicant life, a lot of them couldn't afford the buses, and the buses only went a certain amount. I mean, not all the pilgrimage places were accessible by buses. Kedarnath, when I went there, it was about a day's walk beyond the last point where the buses stopped. Now I think buses go all the way there. But I walked all the way from Rishikesh along with sadhus to Kedarnath and then Badrinath. Not always the same sadhus, but I was on that path, on that path where sadhus do. Well, I don't know to what extent it's there. Probably it's still there now, but in those days it was still many sadhus used to walk, and I walked along with them, and so I was mixing with them. Which, I mean, they were all interesting experiences for me, but they weren't providing the answer that I was looking for. But it was feeding my curiosity and making me more and more curious to know what's behind all these things. Like, I saw people going to temple worshipping. I didn't understand what was behind all this. I mean, I felt there's more to it than what appears outwardly, but I didn't really know. But at the same time, I was reading books. I read a translation of the Bhagavad Gita. I read Aldous Huxley's Perennial Philosophy. I read whatever books I could get hold of, I was reading. And during the course of my travels, when I was in Sri Lanka, I met a couple from Newcastle, and one of them asked me, have you heard of Ramana Maharashi? I said no. And she had a book by Arthur Osborne, a biography of Ramana Maharashi by Arthur Osborne. And in that I read about his death experience. That kindled my curiosity. I decided when I go back to India, I want to go to Tiruvannamallai, which is where Bhagavan lived. And I'll say Bhagavan for Ramana Maharashi, because that's what we used to do. Where Bhagavan lived. So I wanted to go there.
But when you say his death experience, what was his death experience?
His death experience when he was a 16-year-old boy in Madurai, schoolboy, going to school as usual. One day he was alone in a room in his house, and he was supposed to be studying for whatever, his school's homework, whatever. And suddenly an intense fear of death came upon him. And he has described it later when people questioned him about it. He described it in words, but he said actually what happened was beyond words. I mean, though he, for the sake of giving people some idea of what happened, he expressed it in words. But how he expressed it in words was, but when that intense fear of death came, he understood that he had to confront death. He had to find out for himself whether what he was. When that fear came, what he understood, the body is going to die. But when the body dies, do I also die? There was an incident earlier in his life, but had some bearing on this. When he was 12 years old, his father had passed away. And after his father passed away, the body was lying there and ready to be taken for cremation, and everyone was weeping. And he was just puzzled by the whole thing. But he said, why everyone's saying father has gone, father's just lying here? And someone said, no, if it was your father, if this was your father, he would talk to you, he would smile, he would everything. But see, he's not responding to you, so he is dead. Then he thought to himself, all this time I was taking this body to be my father, but now they say my father has gone, and this body obviously is not my father. Then what is the difference between this body lying here and this body, my own body? Then after thinking for some time, he understood the difference is, I now know the I am in this body, but the I that was in my father's body has gone. That he came to that understanding at the age of 12. So obviously this was a seed that was working in his mind. So when this fear of death came to him, what he wanted to find out is, when this body dies, am I also going to die?
Right. I think a lot of us have the same question.
Yeah. So, but generally, when we get a fear of death, if circumstances arise that give us a fear of death, we generally, how most of us respond is our mind goes outwards. We think of all the things that we fear to lose, our friends, our relatives, all the things that we hold dear in life. Those are the things we fear to lose, so our mind goes outward. In Bhagavan's case, it worked the opposite way. Rather than thinking about his mother, his brothers, his sister, his friends at school and everything, he thought only about I. When the body dies, am I going to die? So his mind went inwards. And because his mind went inwards, trying to find out what is this I, the clear experience of his real nature shone forth, thereby consuming the one who had the fear, the ego, but had been there previously. And consuming means absolute annihilation, dissolution, eradication. Yeah. So that one moment completely transformed him from being a person to being what is actually real.
Okay.
But in our view, he continued to live as a person for another 54 years. But he made it very clear the outward person that he seemed to be existed only in the view of others. In his view, there is only that infinite space of pure awareness.
Okay, just to keep the story going. Yes. So somebody, I think, lent you a book, Who Am I?
Yes. One
of his books.
Well, no. This was when I first read about this death experience, that was in a biography.
Yes.
So then I went back to India. I didn't immediately go to Tiruvannamallai because the weather was warming up. I went for another summer in the Himalayas. Then I came south again, and in September of that year, I came to Tiruvannamallai. I didn't know much about his teachings, except I'd read this death experience, but I was curious to know more. But I was expecting, because I had visited so many ashrams, I'd gone on Buddhist Vipassana meditation courses, I'd done all these sort of things. So I thought I may stay there for a few days, find out, maybe get a few books, and then go on further on my travels. But when I got there, the first book I read was Who Am I?, which is a very, originally it was answers that Bhagavan gave when he was very young, when he was about 20 or 21 years old, when someone called Shiv Prakashan Pillai came to him and asked him a series of questions. The first question being, Swami, who am I? So he asked, Shiv Prakashan Pillai asked a series of questions. He noted down the answers, because in those days Bhagavan wasn't talking very much. Sometimes he may talk a few words, but generally when answering he would just write on the sand on the ground. He would write in the sand or on a slate. Sometimes Shiv Prakashan Pillai would give him a slate or piece of paper and he would write on that. So Shiv Prakashan Pillai would then note down what he had replied. And for many years nobody knew about this except Shiv Prakashan Pillai. But after about in the early 1920s, I think in 1923, Shiv Prakashan Pillai had written a biography of Bhagavan in Tamil verse. And when that was, some friends of his wanted to publish that as a book, as an appendix in that book, a short selection of, I think, 13 questions and answers from those dialogues were published as an appendix. When that was published, people were very interested in it. They wanted to know, did you ask more questions? Did you record more? So then a bigger book of about 32 questions and answers came out. And later, in about 1926 or 27, Bhagavan himself rewrote it in the form of an essay. So this is the earliest teachings of Bhagavan, and it's really it's the best introduction to Bhagavan's teachings.
Okay. And that impacted you, obviously, when you read that?
That impacted me, yes. I mean, when I read that, it just struck me, this is what I've been looking for all this time.
Yeah.
Because I can't pretend, but I mean, it's a very, very simple essay well, it's published both as a question and answer form and as an essay, but the essay is what Bhagavan wrote. Though it's a very short, I mean, in the essay form, it is, it's 20 paragraphs. In the question and answer form, there are 28 questions and answers. So it's a very small text.
But what I'm interested in, sorry to interrupt you, is because what you told me on the phone, that when you read the book, your questions disappeared in the form that they were.
Yes.
So I'm interested in that, and how that changed your thinking, if you like.
But what I was going to say is, when I first read it, I can't pretend, but though it's a very simple text, it's very, very deep. So I can't pretend that I understood all of it. But the main thing that I got from it is, what we need to know is I. Whatever we may know about other things, about God or about world or science, or philosophy, or religions, all these things, they're all about things other than ourselves. And so until we know what we ourselves are, none of the knowledge that we have about anything else is entirely reliable. So it was very, very clear to me when I read that. But what we really need to know, and what unknowingly I've been seeking all this time, is to find out who am I. That it just, because the whole of our experience of life, it's all centered around this I. It's I who experience all this. Without I, there's nothing. So this became very clear to me when I read that book the first time. And if I can't remember exactly what I said to you, but if I said my questions dissolved,
in the form they were.
In the form they were, yes, because I was previously thinking about meaning of life, purpose of life, all these things. That was the form in which my questions were framed. But the whole focus was shifted, and the questions I was asking became much clearer, because this is the ultimate thing, is to find out who am I.
Yes.
So all my other questions were questions related to that.
And then you kind of made a commitment, didn't you? And you ended up staying there for 20 years.
Well, I didn't even feel I made a commitment. I mean, it just happened. It was just, this is what I was looking for. It just caught me. And it was, ever since then, this has been an enduring fascination for me. It's been it's been the passion that has been driving my life.
Yeah, when the passion comes across, I can feel it.
Yeah.
And I think a little later you met you read a book by Sri Sadhu Om, which was an interpretation of Bhagwan's...
Yes, an explanation of what is... Because after reading Who Am I understood that the most important thing is practice. We need to actually investigate and find out who we are. So the practice is all important. But how exactly to practice, what exactly is to be practiced, wasn't clear to me at that time. So I started reading books, all the books I could find. And a lot of what was written in the books I read was not convincing to me. So I was looking for how actually to put it into practice. And possibly 1-2 weeks after I had read Who Am I was fortunate that I came across this book, Path of Sri Ramana by Sadhu Om. And when I read that convinced me, yes, all it is, in order to find out what we are, we have to attend to ourselves.
We have to attend to ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, attention or observation is the basic tool by which we know anything. How scientists find out about atoms, about germs, about distant planets and everything, the basic tool. They may have all sorts of sophisticated radio telescopes and all sorts of sophisticated equipment, but the basic tool that is used is observation. So when we're looking outside, we've got our 5 senses, and if the 5 senses are not adequate, we can develop all this technology, and we can have microscopes, telescopes, all sorts of things, aids to helping us to observe. But when we're looking within, the only tool we have to find out who we are is observation, our own attention. We have to attend to ourselves to see what we ourselves actually are. Now our attention is always going outwards, so we're always self-aware. There's never
when you say attention, it's like watching our thoughts, watching our reactions. No. So explain what you mean by attention.
Okay. Attention is a selective use of our awareness. Now we're aware of many things, but we can choose. I can attend to the flowers, I can attend to the camera, I can attend to you. I can choose what I focus my awareness on. So when I said our attention is generally going outwards doesn't mean, outwards means away from ourselves. Yes. So not only the seemingly external world, but also our thoughts, our feelings, all these are outside, according to the definition of outside that Bhagavan gives. Okay. The only thing that is inside is ourself, the one who is observing all these things. So there's subject and object. Attending to any object, which includes any thought, any feeling, anything, is an outward going attention. We want to turn our attention back to attend only to this I.
But for most people, there's hardly a starting point there, because in most teachings you're watching your thoughts, you're being aware of your reactions, you're being aware of your feelings.
Yes, and for many people have difficulty understanding what self-attention is, because generally when we talk about attention, we're attending to objects, to something other than ourselves, to some phenomena. But we are not an object. What we actually are, we are not an object, we're not a phenomena. We are that which is aware of all these things.
I think we understand that.
So it's self-attention, self-attentiveness is not an objective attention. So it's something very, very subtle. Some people question whether it's even possible to attend to oneself if one is not an object. But how I try to explain it is, we are always self-aware. There is never a moment when we are not self-aware. But though we are always self-aware, we are generally negligently self-aware, because we are more interested in being aware of things other than ourselves. We are overlooking the self-awareness. It's there in the background, it's a constant background. We can't be aware of anything without being aware, I am aware of this. So the self-awareness is always there in the background, but we don't attach much importance to it. We don't take much interest in it. It's
covered up, isn't it? It's covered up somehow with all the...
Well, yes. In a sense it's covered up, but the main problem is our lack of interest. We're more interested in knowing about other things, in experiencing other things, than we are in experiencing just ourselves. Okay. So we have to slowly wean our interest away from other things we need to be passionately interested to know what we ourselves are. In this way, our attention is slowly weaned away from other things, back towards ourselves.
So when you first started doing this,
yes,
was it difficult, or was it something you connected with and you just felt?
As time goes on, the understanding becomes more subtle and more refined. And the whole process, in a way, the whole process of self-investigation is a matter of now our self-awareness is mixed up with awareness of other things. I am aware of myself, that I am this body, I am Michael. But this is not what I actually am, because this body is something that appears in the waking state. In dream, this body is not there. I experience some other body as myself, so I can't be anybody. Even the mind that I seem to be, the mind is there in waking, the mind is there in dream. But in sleep, the mind isn't there, but I'm still there. I'm still aware that I'm in a state where I'm not aware of anything.
Yeah, but in sleep, surely the mind is processing, because we get the dreams, surely that's...
No, when I talk about sleep, I'm talking about dreamless sleep.
Okay.
Taking it into 3 states: waking, dream, and sleep.
Okay.
In sleep, the state where there is a state in which we're not aware of anything. Okay. But we are aware of being in a state where we're not. Now we can clearly distinguish between waking, dream, and sleep. We're aware that there are 3 distinct states. We're aware when we wake up in the morning. Sometimes if we just doze off in the day, we may be aware we didn't actually go to sleep, we were just dreaming for a while, but we are aware sometimes when we wake up from sleep, but we weren't dreaming anything. We were in a state without any dream, any phenomena at all. We were aware. Generally people think of sleep as a state of non-awareness, unconsciousness. But that is because we are not aware of anything in sleep. But we're aware of being in that state in which we're not aware of anything. So there is a deeper level of awareness in sleep. So that is, according to Bhagavan, that is the real awareness. The awareness that we experience in waking and dream, underlying it is this basic awareness. And superimposed on that awareness is awareness of things, of phenomena.
Yes.
So the awareness of phenomena, according to Bhagavan, is not real awareness. That is a superficial appearance. It's something that comes and it goes. But the real awareness is the pure awareness. Pure awareness means it's not awareness of anything, but just awareness. There's a term I sometimes use, transitive awareness and intransitive awareness. Transitive awareness is awareness of anything. But in order to be aware of something, we must be aware. But in order to be aware, it's not necessary to be aware of something, because in sleep we're aware, but we're not aware of anything. So the fundamental awareness is just pure awareness, not awareness of anything, just pure awareness. Awareness of something, transitive awareness, is something that is superimposed on that in waking and dream. That is the nature of the mind, that is the nature of the ego, to be transitively aware. But our real nature is to be just aware.
But when you talk to me now,
yes,
is there a feeling of pure awareness?
It's always there in the background, but I don't experience it in its purity now, because I'm aware of other things.
Yes.
But I'm aware that because I've been following this practice for a long time, I'm able to distinguish. I mean, if I could distinguish it perfectly, then that would be the end of the story. But
we'll talk about that in a minute.
As we go deeper into the practice, the distinction between the pure awareness and the awareness that we call mind or ego, the awareness of things, that distinction becomes clearer and clearer as we go deeper. And it has to become clearer because we are trying to separate the pure awareness from this superimposed transitive awareness. The intransitive awareness is our real nature. we're trying to separate it from the transitive awareness. In other words, we're trying to be aware of ourself alone. We're trying to isolate ourselves. Now we're aware of so many things, including ourselves. We want to isolate the self-awareness from the awareness of all other things. That is why this is a very, very subtle and deep path.
But I'm trying to find practicalities here.
Yes.
If people are watching this,
Yes.
and they feel a draw like you felt
Yeah.
a draw when you
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
you first read the first book.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that, okay, you've said that when you talk to me, there's less awareness of pure awareness. Of course, it's still there,
Yes.
but you're engaging,
Yeah.
so you're engaging with me
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
outside
Yes.
world. So presumably, when one sits quietly and meditates,
Yeah.
maybe reflects,
Yeah.
that's the sort of starting point to really
Yeah. Yeah.
start to feel
Yeah.
for yourself the pure awareness.
Yes, well, but it's not only that. I mean, that pure awareness, as you say, it's there at all times. So there are two aspects of the practice, we can say. One aspect is sometimes when our mind has no need to be going outwards, some people find it useful to sit down with eyes closed, or you can lie down. It doesn't really matter. The posture of the body doesn't matter. But there are times when there's no compelling need for our mind to go outwards towards anything else. We can then go deeper into that pure awareness. But even in the midst of activities, even now when we're talking, I'm aware that I am. So that self-awareness is always there. So I can always, the deeper we go into the practice, the more, even in the midst of other activities, the self-awareness will be, sometimes it's described as a tenuous current of self-awareness, but no words can adequately describe it. Another way of saying that shines more prominently in our awareness than it would if we were totally negligent. So even now while we're talking, I mean, actually it's particularly beneficial. That's one of the reasons why I love to talk about this subject, and I love to write about this subject, because it keeps my mind dwelling on that. Though the mind is partially going outward, what is the subject we're talking about? It's this self-awareness. So it's keeping talking these things, writing about these things, reading about these things, hearing about these things. It all helps, if we're using it properly, to keep our attention on the self-awareness, at least to a partial extent. But ultimately, now we are aware of ourselves as a person. I am aware of myself. I am Michael. I am this body. That is a mixed self-awareness. That's not pure self-awareness. It's an awareness mixed with adjuncts. This body, is a phenomenon that appears in this waking state. In dream, some other body appears. In both states, whatever body appears, I experience it as I. But this cannot be what I actually am, because I'm there whether this body is there or not. So also with the mind and all the thoughts. Whether the mind is there, as in waking and dream, or absent, as in sleep, I am there. So I'm something. So the aim of self-investigation is we are trying to isolate this self-awareness, this I, from everything else. We're trying to isolate the pure self-awareness. When a scientist tries to, for example, if scientists are making research on a herb, which is supposed to have some medicinal properties, they try to isolate what is the active ingredient. In order to study anything, you have to, in any type of scientific experiment, you have to try and remove as many variables as possible. So you have to try and isolate, so you know that any change that takes place, you're aware of what is where the influences are, but making the change take place. This is how science works. So to study anything, we have to isolate it and study it in isolation. The same with when we're trying to investigate ourselves, we have to isolate our self-awareness from awareness of all other things. It is only by doing so that we can be aware of ourselves as we actually are, because now we are aware of ourselves as I am this person. This person is a body and a mind. this mind is aware of many, as this person, I'm aware of many things. These many things, that is the nature of the ego or mind. The ego is what the mind essentially is. The mind, sometimes we use the mind to refer to the totality of all thoughts and feelings, but we also use mind to refer to that which is aware of all these things. So it's, in that sense, I'm using the word mind or ego. The ego
this is the observer
subject,
part of the mind.
The observer, the subject, the witness, whatever we call it.
Yeah.
That is the nature of that. I'll use the term ego. The nature, because that's a term that Bhagavan most often used. The nature of the ego is to be aware of things other than itself. So long as we're aware of anything other than ourselves, we are experiencing ourselves as ego. In order to be aware of ourselves as we actually are, because our real nature is pure awareness, not awareness of anything, but just pure awareness, we need to isolate ourselves from all these adjuncts, all awareness of everything else. Only when we separate ourselves from awareness of everything else and experience the pure awareness in complete isolation, then we will be aware of our real nature. And then the ego is nothing but a wrong awareness of ourselves. I'm aware of myself as I am Michael.
And what happens when you really experience that isolation?
Nothing happens.
Nothing happens? Okay.
Well, all happening ceases.
All happening ceases.
Because happening exists in whose view? What is the first happening? The first happening is our rising as an ego. Because it's only in the view of ourselves.
You see, my experience is, I can get very quiet at times, especially when I meditate a long time, which I do sometimes. And I can get to the stage where I can watch the thoughts arising, but it's quite rare that I'll go more than a few seconds without a thought arising. So I'm just trying to get a feel for what you...
Even those few moments when you think you're there without thoughts arising, the you who are aware of that state is the ego, which is itself a thought.
But the awareness comes afterwards. It's not like, well, I'm just trying to make it as practice as I can for people, but there's that stage where no thoughts are arising. It's not as if I'm thinking there's no thoughts arising, because that's thinking. But afterwards, I don't know what time passes, there's an awareness that comes, which is a thought awareness, that actually nothing seemed to have happened, and I wasn't necessarily asleep. So I'm just trying to get a feel for...
that is a state where you're getting close to that isolation, but it's not complete isolation, because according to Bhagavan used thought in the sense of mental phenomena, and according to him all phenomena are mental phenomena. According to him the whole world is nothing but thoughts, nothing but ideas. It's our own... It's like in a dream. We see in a dream, we see a world full of so many people, we interact with people and everything.
So we're creating, the whole time we're creating, I'm creating you, you're creating me, we both create the studio, is that what you're saying?
Well, how many...
No, I'm asking.
The observer, the one who is aware of all this, is creating all this. You say I and you, as if there are two of us.
But in
your experience, you are aware Michael is an object. Michael is something other than you. You assume Michael is aware. That is your assumption. Like in dream, supposing you were dreaming, and you were having this conversation in a dream, you would assume the Michael you're talking to is aware. But when you wake up, you realize that the Michael you were talking to was just your own mental projection.
Yes, no, well, I have a feel for it. I was trying to get it clearer, the whole thing.
But that's why I'm saying this, to clarify this, because according to Bhagavan, there is only one ego. And it's that one ego. Who is that one ego? The one who sees all this.
Yes. But this, again, you mentioned this to me on the phone. I'm just trying to get it clearer in terms of the creation process. So I'm not talking about
Yeah,
creation
yeah,
and
yeah,
evolution
yeah,
of man.
yeah,
I'm talking
yeah,
about
no,
creation
no,
in this
yeah, yeah, yeah.
in this point
Yeah.
in time. So what you're saying is that it's not pure awareness creating, is it?
No.
You're saying it's the group ego, the consensus ego. Is that what you
in how a dream is created? You're asleep. Suddenly, you rise as an ego. As an ego, you project a body, which you experience as yourself, and through the five senses of that body, you project a world. All those things are in a dream. All that is entirely your own projection. The projection of whom? Of the dreamer. The dreamer is the one who is aware of the dream. So the one who is aware of the dream is himself a creation. Bhagavan made it very clear. What is the first cause for everything is the ego. In one verse in Untitled Chapter, he says, if the ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If the ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. The ego itself is everything. Therefore, investigating what it is giving up everything. Because in the previous verse, he says that if you investigate it, it disappears. Because it has no substantial reality.
But the one who's investigating it doesn't disappear.
Yes. The one who investigates, because the one who investigates is the ego that investigates itself. When the ego investigates itself, it disappears. What remains is pure awareness, which alone is real and which alone always exists.
Because when we talked on the phone, you talked about this 180 degree shift.
Yes.
And when that happens,
yes,
you're gone.
That 180 degree shift is another way of saying isolating the self-awareness. Because so long as we're facing outwards, there's a self-awareness of the background and there's awareness of other things. As we try to turn our attention back towards ourselves, the awareness of other things recedes into the background. We become more and more clearly aware of ourselves. When we turn the full 180 degrees, we are facing ourselves alone.
So the ego's blown up, it's gone.
Everything else is removed. And
Yes.
without awareness, the ego is something that is a false self-awareness that seems to exist only so long as we're aware of anything else. Bhagavan describes it as a phantom. A phantom seems to exist if you're looking elsewhere. Supposing you're walking through a dense forest at night.
Yes.
There's some moonlight coming through the trees. You see shadows here and there. You're afraid because it's dark. You think there are ghosts everywhere. But if you look at any of those, if you look keenly at any of those phantoms, any of those ghosts, it's not there to be seen. It has no substance. So the ego is a phantom, but seems to exist so long as we look elsewhere. But if we look at the phantom itself, it's nowhere to be found.
Game's up.
Game's up. Yep.
What happens then? Nothing.
Nothing happens. Nothing happens. All happening. The first happening is the rising of the ego.
Yes.
Our appearance as I am this.
Yes.
I am this body.
Yeah.
But the ego never exists without experiencing itself as I am this body. The body is its projection. The body doesn't exist independent of the ego, but the ego rises, taking itself to be a body and seeing all this multiplicity. So when the ego investigates itself and dissolves back into its source, what remains is just the pure self-awareness which is always there.
Okay.
Bhagavan's teaching, many people, nowadays there are many people who read Bhagavan teachings, practice Bhagavan teachings, even start teaching in their own way, based on what their understanding of Bhagavan's teaching. But actually Bhagavan's teachings are far, far deeper than most people appreciate. Many people, nowadays there are so many people who take what they have experienced, what they have understood, to be the final thing. But when we listen to what them talking, the awareness they are talking about is awareness of many things. That awareness is ego. The awareness that is aware of anything other than itself is ego. the real awareness, the true awareness, that Bhagavan has really very clearly distinguished these two. What is, I mean, he's written there several verses in Older Than After where he's talking about what is the difference between the awareness that is aware of things and the real awareness which is aware of nothing other than itself. So
we're going to have to draw to, we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left.
Okay. But I mean, this is one of the most important, this distinction is clearly understood, but so long as we're aware of anything other than ourselves, that is ego. If we understand, I mean, that's one of the most key principles of Bhagavan's teaching, and it's also one of the most radical things which is not appreciated by most people, even though they may have been reading his teaching, practicing his teaching for so many years. But real awareness is only pure self-awareness. So long as there's the slightest awareness of anything other than ourselves, any phenomena of any kind whatsoever, that is ego.
Okay. What I wanted to slip in here, which
Yes.
is going back to your story,
Yes.
which I know we've gone way beyond stories,
Yeah.
but it's
Yeah.
just, I wanted to kind of recognize your incredible dedication, because you lived in India for 20 years.
Yes.
And you learnt Tamil,
Yes.
so you could translate the
Yes.
teachings.
Yes.
And when you were working with Sadhu Om,
Yes.
he was writing things on a slate.
Yeah.
And then his English was bad. Your Tamil at that stage was fairly
Very
embryonic.
rudimentary. Yes.
Yeah. And somehow you formed this relationship with
Yeah.
him. You worked with him for 8.5 years.
Yes.
He was I think a primarily, not so much a disciple, but a primary proponent of
Yes.
Bhagavan's
Yeah.
teaching.
Yes.
And you really dedicated your life to this, haven't
Yeah.
you?
Yeah.
On
Yeah.
on the level of form,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have
yeah.
really dedicated your life. And it's extraordinary dedication.
Even to say I've dedicated my life, somehow it caught me. I can't claim any credit for myself. It's just like a moth. When it flies around a flame,
Yes.
it just can't leave the flame. It's fascinated by the flame. So for me, Bhagavan's teachings are so fascinating. It's just caught me, and I can't escape. And I don't yet have the courage to go close enough to be consumed. But
Well, that's an interesting point. I'm going to try and slip this in now. So, when you say you don't have the courage to go close enough to the flame, what does that mean practically then?
practically, it means I still have desires and attachments. I still have interest in being aware of phenomena.
The outside,
Yes,
yeah.
yeah. So long as there's the slightest desire to be aware of phenomena, we have not surrendered ourselves completely, because the self that we have surrendered, that's the ego, is that which is aware of phenomena. In order to free ourselves from ego, we have to free ourselves from all this taste in phenomena. But this interest in phenomena, this liking to be aware of phenomena, is the very nature of the ego. So we can, in the process of, we can wean our mind away from interest in external things to a certain extent, but ultimately we have to cut at the root. The root is the ego. The ego is the full self-awareness, I am this.
But is that our decision, or is that almost the grace of God in one way when that happens?
It's very difficult to say the difference between them, because God is not something outside. God is
I
our
understand
own
that.
real
I understand
nature.
that.
The
Yeah.
grace of God is the love that our real nature has for itself, that we as our
Okay.
real nature have for ourselves. So it's our own love which is drawing, it's our own love for ourselves, for our real nature, which is drawing us into this
Yes.
path. So we often in devotional literature, Bhagavan has written hymns on Arunachala, in which he's expressing in seemingly dualistic language. He's praying to Arunachala for grace, but you can see the dualistic expression and the underlying non-dualistic experience are beautifully woven into those verses.
Yes.
Because ultimately, even the guru who appears outside, even Bhagavan, is nothing but our own self. because our mind is going outwards, our real nature has appeared outside in the form of Bhagavan to tell us turn within.
Okay.
So it's all grace. It's all grace.
It's all grace.
But the grace is not something coming from heaven or something. The grace is our own love. Ultimately, the grace is our own love to be happy. And we all love to be happy.
And that
is what is driving us.
Is the title of your book,
Yeah.
Happiness and the Art of Being. We haven't talked directly about happiness, but we've certainly talked about the bigger subject, which includes happiness.
Yes.
I'm going to stop you there because the clock's telling me that we need to take a break. Thank you very much. It's not easy sometimes to understand the teaching.
No.
There's a lot of depth there.
Well, I've been following. I've been trying to understand these teachings for 40 years, and still I find my understanding is it's constantly getting deeper and deeper and deeper.
Yes.
The more we practice, the more clarity comes, and the deeper. We can't express it in words, but I'm very well aware of an ever deepening clarity.
It's ever deepening, and you're in pretty deep. Anyway, I'm going to show you a book again, Happiness and the Art of Being, an introduction to the philosophy and practice of the spiritual teachings of Bhagavan Sri Ramana by Michael James. And it's not an afternoon read, but it's a long holiday read. Michael, thank you very much.
Right.
And it's really been fascinating. Thank you for watching Conscious TV, and I hope we see you again soon. Goodbye.